there's some perverse incentives there, even at 11%, which is what they say it is.
Commissioner Pat.
So two questions, and this might be answered by Dave or Thomas. I was interested to see what I did not know previously was that the excess amount of money was supposed to be going to schools, and there is nothing that makes me more frustrated than our children not getting the resources that are owed to them. And so I wonder what you know about if any of that excess money is actually getting to them, and if so, what kind of proportion comparative to what it is supposed to be.
So we asked the state for any instances where the excess revenue had been reported and a check had been sent. And the way that it's set is for anything over 30% to go to the schools. So if you have 50%, the extra 20% goes to the schools in your county. They had shared with us that it had happened once, but it was on the western side of the state from a very, very small town. But there was no instances they had recorded from the St. Louis area.
And how long has that law been on the books?
I know that it was just changed over the course of this past year and a half, so it's probably about that long, but before that in some form, Thomas, do you know, years before that though, as well.
But I'm not
You said 1997.
And yeah, it's been modified since.
Okay, thank you. And my other question is for Professor Quinn. Given that education was, I guess, the third most important topic that folks in the first voting wanted to talk about, and just for the sake of the conversation that is coming, I would like for you to connect the dots a little bit for people, given what you implied talking about the necessity of us talking about discipline practices, et cetera, in schools. So if you've got the kind of young man that you talked about being held for 14 hours, no explanation, then getting dropped back off into his neighborhood like nothing ever happened.
He got let out the front door with no money to get home.
Thank you for that correction, an important
Sorry.
one. No, that's an important correction. Do not apologize. So then what are our children carrying with them into school when those kinds of things are happening to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit it on the head. I mean, only in recent years, I think, have we paid enough attention to trauma and its impact on young people and trauma-informed practices then being used in our courts. Instead, what we have in the municipal court system is a trauma-imposing system. It is not at all concerned with harm reduction or the like to these young people. And absolutely, I think the kids go into school, they talk to their teachers about these issues. I've had teachers call me in the city saying, 17-year-old's been picked up, I don't know where he is, and the two of us hopped in my car and went to go look for this kid. They're out of school. There are issues of education and educational services for young people while they're incarcerated. I mean, I don't want to overstate it, right, because the cap in municipal court is 90 days in jail, and I haven't had kids in for many, many, many days, but enough that they've missed school and they're behind, and they're surely not getting those services while in our local jails. In fact, across the state, it's a somewhat separate issue, but young people who are charged as adults, if they're sitting in our jails, they will get no educational services for weeks, months, and sometimes years until they are sent to state prison.
Thank you.
Can I? Sorry.
Yes.
I just want to say something that it's not directly impacting the children, but the way we've seen in the representation of homeless folks is at some point on their path to homelessness, many of them are arrested on one of these warrants and held in jail. They end up losing their housing, which of course loses the housing for children as well, right? So in the middle of an academic year, they're trying to change school districts, which we all know disrupts their education and has a direct impact on it. So it's not always the case that you know, these courts are a factor in the creation of homelessness, but certainly that disruption, if people lose their housing, is going to destroy people's educational opportunities as well.
Thank you very much for making sure that's represented.
Thank you. I have a question. You said that for municipalities that are out of compliance and municipalities that haven't reported, that there's a process in place to dismantle it and unauthorized. How does that work? What needs to happen to say this municipal court can no longer function this way or at all?
So when they fail to report is when the municipal courts lose their jurisdiction under the law. When they go over 30%, if they still report it to the state, they technically retain their jurisdiction, is our understanding. But what they fail to do is provide that excess money to the schools, which could also help have them lose jurisdiction. So It's supposed to be, according to the law, as plainly read, automatic. So the courts should lose jurisdiction when they fail to timely report.
Okay, so if the court fails to report, there's an automatic provision that they lose jurisdiction?
What is stated is that they lose jurisdiction of their court.
That
Yeah.
simply.
Let's make it more clear, David. Who has enforcement authority for
Yeah,
that
that's what I'm
provision?
saying. Yeah, who
Well,
enforces that?
From what we've seen, no one.
So I unfairly asked you that question. I should have asked one of the lawyers here.
Well,
You are a lawyer?
yes, but what?
I'm not asking. So I'm being clear. I'm not asking you who's doing it.
Right.
I'm asking you who has authority to do it.
Well, technically, the state has the authority to do it. It's a state law.
Who in the state has the authority to do it?
That seems to be something that not only I'm confused about, but the state is as well. We haven't seen it actually happen, so we don't know who would do it.
Do you others have?
Well, I mean, so we have a lawsuit filed against one of the municipalities right now testing that exact question. So we allege that they lost jurisdiction under the theory that Dave's talking about, and that as a result, they operated a court where there was a guy standing in front of the courtroom saying he was a judge, but he wasn't really a judge because they had lost their jurisdiction over traffic-related matters. So we're going to find out what the circuit court has to say about that at some time in the future. But right now, we couldn't figure out what the mechanism is to enforce it. So bringing a lawsuit against municipalities who have failed to report was the first step we took. So we filed against one municipality, and we'll see what the court has to say, and then go from there.
Can I ask a question about if they lose jurisdiction, does it transfer to the county? Well, where does it go?
It could, but the statute just says, I mean, it's among the strongest language you can ever see in a statute. It says, shall immediately lose jurisdiction over traffic-related matters in the municipal court. So I guess we're going to find out what it exactly means. Oh, I mean, they could always have these cases handled in the Associate Circuit Court. That's something that all of the municipalities could elect to do. They could create regional courts. They could create 4 regional courts. They have a broad amount of latitude to solve these problems on their own. It's just that, as Professor Quinn said, Professor Lauer wrote that article 50 years ago. It's not like people didn't know about this. It's been going on for a long time.
So let me pursue this just a little bit further, because this, to have municipalities violating a law that is on its face as clear as it is appalling, right? So pushing further on who can enforce this, does the Supreme Court have the authority of making rules for the courts in the state? Would any prosecutor have the authority to bring an action? Would the state attorney general have the authority to bring an action? Last week, Starsky and I issued a statement at the end of the meeting based upon data, some of the data that you provided, David, that these municipalities were over 30% and should immediately cease these practices. So we want to nail down who's potentially got the authority here, and how do we push them to take the action they need to take?
Well, so the agencies that are involved in this process, and this is as direct an answer as I know how to give, because it's just not a process we've seen, is the Director of Revenue, because they're supposed to be receiving the funds, the state auditor, because the financials are supposed to be reported to them every year. I would imagine that the Attorney General does have authority to file a suit on behalf of some of the people, but those are the 3 that I know have been the main focus.
Yeah, so, I mean, some of what you're pointing out is just this problem of these claims laying on the backs of individual plaintiffs, many of whom barely have enough money to operate their own shops. And I haven't spent as much time with this statutory scheme as these guys have, but I would think the AG would be equally well suited to be able to pursue this kind of claim if so desired. And this commission, I think, could recommend the ability of state level officials to have greater oversight and policing powers in the days ahead, as to municipal courts, as to juvenile justice practices. I mean, we don't seem to have the kind of oversight agencies in this state that you see in the federal executive branch and that you see in a lot of other states, like in